On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we'll look at some of the top news items from across the telecom space over the past week, as well as speak with Gigamon about visibility fabric needed for NFV deployments. Well, thanks for joining us in this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief at RCR Wireless News. On today's show, we will have an interview with Andy Huckridge, who's the head of service provider practice at Gigamon, on visibility fabric needed for NFV deployments. But first, let's take a look at some of the top headlines from across the telecom-related NFV, SDN, cloud, and software space from the past week. The Open Networking Foundation updated its Atrium Open SDN solution with support for the Linux Foundation's OpenDaylight platform. The move is being released under the Atrium 2016A tag. ONF said the update builds on the now termed Atrium 2015A release from last June that used an ONOS platform, which is now providing support for OpenDaylight into the Atrium router. The equipment is built on the OpenDaylight framework and is said to control OpenFlow hardware switches using Kuraga's open source implementation of the Border Gateway Protocol, which is being used for internet routing. The update also brings along OpenDaylight's device identification and device module support for work across multiple OpenFlow version 1.3 hardware for Atrium 2015A's flow objectives and device drivers. The Atrium 2016A solution is said to also include leaf-spine fabric, which is described as a first layer 2 and 3 closed network fabric built using Open Compute Project hardware and can scale up to 16 racks using design principles of layer 3 down to the top of the rack switch. The fabric is set to be field trialed with a major operator as part of the Central Office Rearchitected as data center project with ON.Lab. Also this week, Verizon Communications is reportedly set to shut down some of its public cloud operations in favor of its own private cloud services. According to Fortune magazine, customers using Verizon Public Cloud Reserved Performance and Marketplace will see those services shutter on April 12th. Those set to be impacted have reportedly been asked to migrate their content to Verizon's virtual private cloud platform. The story cited a Verizon spokesman who said the shutdown impacts cloud services that accept credit card payments, but that the company remains committed to delivering a range of cloud services for enterprise and government customers and is making significant investments in its cloud platform in 2016. Reports earlier this year claimed Verizon was looking to raise more than $2.5 billion through the sale of 48 data centers as it continued to monetize non-core assets. Those assets included those acquired as part of its $1.4 billion acquisition of Terramark Worldwide in 2011, which it said at the time would bolster its cloud service operations. Well, with that, let's take a look at our interview with Andy Huckridge from Gigamon, where we talk a bit about the visibility fabric needed for NFV deployments. All right, well, thanks for joining us this week. This week we're joined by Andy Huckridge, who's the head of service provider practice at Gigamon, to talk a bit about the NFV space. So hey, Andy, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's lovely to be here with you.
Sounds like you have a great background there. Obviously, a nice day where you are, so that's always nice to see as well here. I'm in Colorado, so we've still got snow outside, so I'm a little jealous of you, but we'll talk about that at some other time. But hey, again, thanks for taking the time. So maybe start off with maybe just a little overview of the company for those who perhaps don't know much about you guys, kind of what you guys do and how you kind of participate in the NFV and maybe telecom space.
Wonderful, thank you. So I will say I was in Wales over the Christmas period just passed, and it rained every day there. So so I'm trying to get as much outside sun as I possibly can. So fair enough. Anyway, right, moving right along. So Gigamon, we've been around for around about 10 years. We did an IPO a few years ago, and we're the only pure play visibility vendor in the market space for telcos. Now, what does visibility mean? Well, visibility is all about providing access to data in a service provider or an enterprise network such that you can connect analytic tools and get an idea of the traffic flowing on that network, or even the subscriber activity in terms of being able to get a better idea of what's going on and how the network is being used to tune the network out. So there's also security implications of this as well. We also provide visibility to data for security tools to make sure that networks are secure. But essentially, it's all about visibility. It's all about providing access to the data on the network to analytic tools.
Makes sense. Okay. Well, I know, I guess in terms of NFV, and I know we were kind of emailing back and forth on this as well, something I think you brought up was the fact that, obviously with the telecom market and mobile operators moving towards NFV and virtualization, what it provides for operators is obviously a much, I guess, greater breadth of abilities to kind of really tap into their network resources, basically. But what it seems to also be able to do is, again, provide a lot more information coming up through the carrier. And it seems like one of the arguments you're kind of making with this visibility layer is the fact that operators really need to maybe take a step back and make sure that what they're doing, they can actually take advantage of what they're implementing in terms of virtualization. Is that kind of correct of what I was assuming your kind of point was?
Sure.
Okay.
So we believe that NFV, network functions virtualization, is a wonderful thing. Everyone remembers back to the days where it was circuit switched and there were very limited amounts of vendors. The prices were very high, so on and so forth. So now we've moved from having hardware solutions to being able to have software implementations of various network elements, and that's a wonderful thing, right? But essentially, what we now have is we have software-enabled elements sitting in obfuscated hardware, where the operators have no idea or can't get access to the traffic anymore. So the issue is, and this is what we all have to ask ourselves: are there unintended consequences of deploying NFV? All of a sudden, you can't get access to the data. You don't know where your data is. You don't know where your hardware is. So, when that network goes down, in that snowstorm that we just had on the East Coast there, where's the data? Where's your hardware? Where's the traffic and all the rest of this? So what we're saying is that NFV is a wonderful thing. SDN is a wonderful thing. Both of these are reducing OpEx and CapEx, but how do you get access to the data? How do you find where the servers are? How do you find where the traffic is? How do you debug all of the virtualness as we move to a more virtual world without the capability to be able to look inside these servers to find out where the traffic is? Let's just take an example. If you've got two network elements that are residing in the same server in a data center somewhere, well, then we can say that traffic, or a lot of that traffic, doesn't actually hit a wire anywhere. It stays inside the server. For argument's sake, it stays inside the same processor. How do you get access to that? How do you work out what's going on? How do you debug that? So, we fully believe in NFV. We wouldn't have it any other way. We think it's a wonderful thing for the operator. We think it's a wonderful thing for the subscriber, for everyone that's going in that direction. All we're saying is that let's at least remember that we have to have the ability to work out what's going to go wrong if and when it does go wrong. And generally, things do go wrong for whatever reason.
Sure. And that's an interesting topic because, again, I've talked to a lot of people, on the operations side of things when it comes to this move towards virtualization. And, as you know, traditionally, telecom operators are very conservative. They're using equipment that they've been very familiar with, that they've been using for, decades at some point as well. So the operations guys know the ins and outs of the equipment. They know if something happens, they kind of have an idea of what it is, if it's a true alarm or not a true alarm, or where things are. But as it's moved towards virtualization, it does seem like some of these guys I've talked to, there is that level of concern about, hey, when I flip this stuff on and all of a sudden all this information starts pouring over the network, and something goes wrong on that first weekend or over a snowstorm or whatever it is, who gets the call at 2 a.m. on that night to say, hey, what's happening here? And that's their biggest concern because they don't know, because a lot of these guys this is all new to them. So it seems like what you're I guess saying is, hey, we have to make sure we've got everybody on a comfort level with what's going to happen, basically.
Right. So there's an old saying, in this industry, in the operations industry with the IT operations managers, it's all about getting your weekend back, right? And now what they're trying to do is to get their evening times back, and, to try to get their work week back. So if you dig into it in a little bit more detail, then you also run into interoperability issues. So I've been involved with various industry forums previously, both head of conformance and head of interoperability working groups. And as we all know, it's not that hard to say that unless a vendor is made to work with another vendor in a service provider setting, and they're made to connect their equipment together, and they're made to test it in an open forum, then interoperability is the first thing that generally goes out the window. So if you don't have visibility, and if you don't have interoperability, then what is the likelihood that we can actually reasonably deploy NFV, which again is a wonderful technology, and I'm fully behind it. So all we're saying here is that there's some unintended consequences that maybe we should think about. Now, there's moves afoot to start doing interoperability of the VNFs, the virtual network functions, inside of the NFV infrastructure. And we would expect to see that coming up as we go forward here. But again, I'm going to come back to that same message, is that visibility allows you to be able to define an ingress point, an egress point on a network, to understand what the network element is doing in software, and then to be able to understand how it works with other network elements, also in software, maybe from different vendors. And then also, to be able to work out what's not working, why. I mean, is it a SIP header issue? Is it an RTP issue? Is it what is it? Is it a delay issue? Is it one VNF badly interacting with another VNF on the same processor? Do you have a bursty traffic? Do you have a VNF causing bursty traffic here with a VNF over here that needs a lot of processing capability and a smooth line of processing? So these are all of the unintended consequences, and it's not going to work out of the gate. It's as simple as that. You've got to be able to have the tools, the capabilities, to get the insight to say, okay, well, I'm not going to put these two VNFs together, or this VNF is bursty, or can't put it on this server. It's got to have the capability to overflow and things like this. So all we're saying is, it's sort of the start of the best practices to deployment. And Gigamon works in a service assurance setting through visibility, through monitoring. And all we're saying is, we've seen some of this before. So let's help ourselves out here before we go and deploy this and it all goes horribly wrong, which nobody wants.
Yes. Well, that's a good point, man. I know the interoperability topic is always one that's been a bit tricky when it comes to virtualization, because again, operators are trying to move away from that vendor lock situation. But obviously, as we all know, the benefit of vendor lock was, hey, you're pretty confident that everything's going to work along the lines there. But you're right, interoperability, it seems like that's going to be a key to all of this. And I know I've talked to a lot of organizations that are working on ensuring that there's interoperability and standards, if that's the right word to use, and what's becoming more of an open source world. I mean, does it seem like that the bodies that are kind of somewhat in charge of interoperability and standards, if that's the right word for it, I mean, are they working to the right endpoint, but are they also working at a good enough clip to keep ahead of what seems to be a pretty rapid deployment of this? I mean, some operators are moving pretty rapidly, others, obviously not quite as much, but it seems like operators are trying to move this along at a pretty good clip, and it still seems like you're saying, there are still some issues that might need to be taken care of before we get too crazy with this.
Right. So what generally happens is that the industry forums catch up after the facts, and you end up with the carriers. So this actually brings up a very, very interesting area. So LTE is a very, very flattening technology. So everyone has deployed LTE. I mean, there's still patches in the world where they're still deploying it, but it's mostly deployed everywhere. So what we have is exactly the same technology deployed in multiple carriers all over the world, and we have a decreasing of competition amongst those carriers because they're essentially all running the same technology. So we have CapEx spending, which has gone down because of SDN and NFV. We have OpEx expense, which has gone down because you don't need as much overhead expense to run that same equipment and to manage it and so on and so forth. So there's a number of things happening. So first of all is that the operators are trying to find, and I'm giving you a long answer to it.
It's okay.
But the operators are trying to find the next competitive area to compete with each other on. So what they're doing is that they're trying to roll this technology out faster, which means that they're bringing the interoperability in-house. So that's what they're doing. So we have various interoperability forums inside some of the leading carriers that are looking at this. So Deutsche Telekom, Verizon, AT&T obviously is certainly one that's leading, and various others around the world as well. Now, that all costs money because all of the carriers are bringing the interoperability in-house through their own labs to be able to get a competitive advantage over their in-market competitors in order to raise up the operational advantage that they have. And so they're all basically doing the interoperability separately and on their own. Now, that's not the right thing, as we know, going forward, because that's what a lot of the, not so much the standards bodies, but that's what a lot of the interoperability forums are there for. So that just gives you a bit of a hint to say that even if one operator gets interoperability across all of their VNFs in their network, that doesn't necessarily carry over to another carrier's network somewhere else, because that interoperability only exists inside that carrier. So there is still a need for industry-wide interoperability. But let me also introduce a new concept here.
Okay.
So after the carrier has reduced OpEx expenses and CapEx expenses associated with SDN and NFV, then there's a new battleground that forms. Because at the end of the day, the carriers still need a way to compete with each other, in the same market. Not everyone can advertise, they have the best LTE, the fastest LTE, the lowest delay LTE, the lowest drop calls, etc. So what we're beginning to see now is a brand new competition area, which is all about subscriber awareness and the reduction of subscriber cost. Mm-hmm. So if you have a certain subscriber that uses certain services and another subscriber that uses a different set of services, then you can argue that not all subscribers are created equal, and that you only need a carrier only needs to spend the visibility, only needs to monitor certain subscribers for the complexity of what they do. If you have a $2,000 a month business subscriber that's using all sorts of features that's really pounding the network, then you probably need to keep a closer eye on that subscriber. You probably need to provide call-in functions, support functions in more depth for that subscriber than for maybe an over-the-top subscriber who's a person that's using the network in the evening times, that's dragging down a bunch of video, this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So what we're seeing is that there's a move to the new battleground essentially is now all about subscriber awareness and tailoring the cost of providing the services on the network on a per subscriber basis for the subscribers. And I'm certainly not getting into any net neutrality stuff here. I'm talking about back-end processing, back-end monitoring, so on and so forth. Now, how all of this ties back into that original question again is that yes, an industry forum is needed to be able to provide interoperability. But at the same time, even when that exists, the operators are still going to be trying to find the new battleground for cost savings or a way to compete with each other after NFV and SDN have reduced the CapEx and the OpEx costs. So that's my rather long-winded answer to your question.
So basically, interoperability, we should never even try to achieve it because it's impossible to achieve.
Oh, now that's an interesting one. It certainly is achievable, but it takes time.
Okay, that makes sense. And now the thing is, and obviously the service awareness part of it, that's an interesting topic because I know there are some operators, I think in Asia, I believe it was, or some are starting to use kind of virtualization in that exact mode to try to, be more aware of what's not just happening on their network, but almost, down to the granular level of which customer is doing what on their network and being able to, again, have that information flow up through their, through their processes, but again, have to have the visibility to actually then do something with it. Because one thing to have information coming in, but if you don't know, what all these numbers mean, it doesn't do you any good. So yeah, it does seem like that's a big part of kind of move to virtualization as well, a way to monetize, or get a leg up on the competition out there too.
Right. So they do say that 2016, or we're at the start of 2016, will be the year of monetizing over the top video. So I hope that does indeed happen. And what we have now is a unique situation where we have the capability to come up with DNFs through software in a very quick, very agile way to be able to tailor services, and then to be able to offer the subscribers on a subscriber by subscriber basis some of the features and services that they want. And what we're saying is that in order for the service provider to continue to be competitive, in order for the service provider to evolve their business, then it all comes down to making sure that you understand some of the unintended consequences of deploying these new technologies, being able to access the data when it's obfuscated inside of the service, understanding some of the interoperability issues, but also then using or harnessing some of these wonderful new capabilities that we have through NFV to do something that people actually want, right? To give the subscribers what they want, and also then with those cost savings to be able to not only run the business more efficiently, which gives the operator a competitive leg up in the market space that they're in, but also to give something back to the subscriber, which helps to reduce churn and so on and so forth. So, and I think we, in the US market where we both are, we've certainly seen some very, very interesting service providers recently doing things in a very, very different way.
Yes.
And this is only the start of things to come.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a good point. I mean, does it seem like to you then that the market, that the operators out there, whether the traditional telecom operators or mobile operators, are they recognizing this need, do you think? Or are they recognizing the need at the right time? I mean, obviously, I'm sure they're thinking about this, but are they, I guess, doing this in the right time, I guess, timeline to make sure that they get this on their networks so they can make these moves like this? I mean, does it seem like that there's enough recognition of this?
Wow, great question. So in terms of recognition, I think that all operators know that there's so much over-the-top competition that something has to be done. So so NFV is certainly that in the way of decreasing costs. But again, as I've said already, it's the beginning. It's not the final panacea. So the last thing that we want is for an operator to go down the wrong path and to roll out a network that there's interoperability issues, things don't work, you can't find the problem. So that's really what we're saying here. And then at that point, as soon as they have the visibility to be able to find those problems, essentially they're off to the races, right? They can bring services very quickly. They can tailor the network to offer certain services for certain types of subscribers. They can even begin to bring out innovative security to overcome a lot of the new security issues with networks as well. So I think we're going in the right direction. All we're saying is, let's just make sure that we've got the tools to back up, as we deploy these new capabilities, to make sure that we don't shut ourselves out of going in the right direction.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess then looking forward a little bit on this, I mean, do you see any challenges to I guess this continued move towards this? I mean, are there things out there? I mean, obviously interoperability is always going to be a challenge out there. Obviously, finances are always a challenge when it comes to what they can do. I mean, what do you see as perhaps the biggest one or two challenges maybe going forward? For the broader terms of NFV deployment, but also for kind of making sure that carriers can put in these different layers to make sure that there aren't these unintended consequences as you guys mentioned.
Sure. Well, I think we've covered most of everything.
Okay.
I mean, there's the one thing about telecom, in the 110 years or so that we've been in the modern telecom infrastructure, there's always new technology every day, right? Yeah. So that hasn't changed from the earliest days of 2 tin cans and the Strowger switches and all the rest of this. So technology is going to speed up. I think that it comes down to a case of how fast can we deploy a lot of this new technology. There's new stuff coming along every day. We certainly see bleeding over from the enterprise and the large enterprise side, a lot more security risks than we used to. We know that not all subscribers are created equal. We know that not all app stores are created equal. Some have a lot more malware in their applications than others do. So I think that that's one area that is going to come probably towards the end of this year, maybe next year, is much more of a focus on security. I hope that doesn't take the innovation away from what we're trying to do. But at the end of the day, whereas before we only had 2 lines coming out of the subscriber, we now have a full 7-layer OSI stack coming out to every subscriber in our pocket. So we probably need to do something more around the security side of things. And if you think about it, subscriber-aware security is probably along those lines. Not all a carrier doesn't necessarily need to spend $2 or $3 per subscriber per month for security on a subscriber that they know has a very trusted handset, as a trusted app store that they get their apps from, versus a new subscriber that uses an app store that's very open, that is side loading their phone and all the rest of this, so that they can then apportion certain security capabilities to certain devices or certain subscribers. And then what that allows them to do is to average down the overall security costs. And security isn't cheap, right? It's to average down security costs to just the ones that are going to cause the problems. And then that in itself will get them a competitive advantage versus the other in-market competitors that the carrier is facing. So I think that what we're seeing is a move to subscriber-aware. So subscriber-aware capabilities, subscriber-aware security, subscriber-aware media to be able to give the carrier literally an understanding of each and every subscriber on the network to tailor the services, the security, and the processing costs, the amount of bandwidth that subscriber needs, again on a per subscriber basis.
Makes sense. Well, I guess I always like to ask everybody too, kind of looking ahead a bit, maybe even longer term. I mean, I know some operators have put out, kind of some timelines on when they want to have more virtualization or more software control of their networks. As you look out ahead, I mean, what sort of timing do you see? Do you think some of these, estimates of, by 2020 having a significant portion of a network controlled by software, I mean, are those realistic, do you think, or are we still looking at perhaps a little bit longer tail on this just because again, we're looking at so many issues that still need to be kind of worked through at this point. What's your kind of crystal ball view of timing of this?
Okay. So I have an interesting way of looking at that. So within my role, I'm global, and I get to go to different countries and see all of these technologies in different appointments. And it's very interesting, right? Because generally one country will start to champion a certain type of technology, then it flows around the world. Back in, when was it, 2007, 2008? It could have been a bit before that. We had BT with a 21st century network, and they ripped out, all of their existing circuit switches and put in soft switches and IP. And everybody else has now done that. We had Korea with old technology called Vibro, which was before WiMAX.
WiMAX,
before LTE. So I think it's probably fair to say that if we look at certain markets, we'll get to see what's coming. But as usual with the telecom cycle, it can take 10 or 15, even 20 years to make its way around the globe. So some of the markets that we are currently looking at and helping, certainly some of the Asian markets, Japan, Korea. North America has certainly led the LTE revolution. And as we go into 5G, I think that there's great competition to see who's going to be leading that. And right now, we don't really have a clear view as to who's going to be leading 5G. There's various different initiatives coming from all over the world. So my crystal ball, although clear, is still somewhat fuzzy.
Understood. You're right. I mean, obviously that 5G movement too. I mean, it does seem like that this move towards virtualization is really tailor-made to really support 5G. I mean, I know here in the U.S., obviously, they always just talk about the Internet of Things and having millions and billions of devices connected. And it just seems like this software control is almost going to be mandatory to really be able to handle what's happening there. And again, with all this new information flooding the network, basically, you've got to have the intelligence on the network to know what's happening out there, and the visibility to kind of see what's going on and be able to react to it. And yeah, you're right. I mean, if there's an outage from a device that's giving you 10 cents a month in revenue, as opposed to a guy who's $2,000 a month from an enterprise, you have to be able to know what's happening and know how to react accordingly to those situations. So yeah, that's going to be a huge challenge for operators going forward. That's for sure.
I actually may be able to quote you on this one. So not all refrigerators are created equal, right?
True.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I didn't bring up IoT, but if you get into so where we are right now, as a sort of a soundbite is we've gone from big data and we're in bigger data, and the things that are creating bigger data, IoT, augmented reality, virtual reality. I remember last year at GSMA in Barcelona, and everyone was walking around with the headsets on,
yes,
right?
Yes,
and bumping into things, but the data is getting larger and larger and larger. So at the end of the day, we've got to work out what it is that is really going to be paying the operator's bill. Is it the 5 cents a month refrigerator? Is it the M2M traffic? Is it the business user? What needs to be monitored? What's going to cause the problems on the network? Is your fridge all of a sudden going to become part of a bot army? We don't know. It's possible. And this is the point that you're bringing up here. How do you manage all of this? How do you manage all the provisioning? Because the provisioning is a real headache with this stuff. And then how do you make sure that the things are provisioned? How do you make sure that there aren't outages to do with all of the provisioning that's needed, and so on and so forth? So again, it all comes back to the same point at the end of the day: is if everything is now a software function and everything is obfuscated, then how on earth are you going to debug when something goes wrong unless you have the visibility, the capability, the tools to be able to look into the network and say, okay, all of a sudden, all of my refrigerators are now part of a bot army. They need to be taken offline. Or, for argument's sake, we need to put them through greater security traffic screening. And it turns out that it's not our subscribers. It's, anyway, you get the idea.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Andy, again, hey, we definitely appreciate the insight of this. Obviously, as this move towards virtualization continues, it is definitely bringing up lots of questions and lots of new expertise is needed across this. So we definitely appreciate the great insight on this today. And obviously, you guys there are working pretty hard on this too. So again, appreciate the time and insight on this today, and definitely enjoy the rest of your day out there. Again, it looks sunny where you're at, so we're jealous of you there. But again, thanks for the time and information. We definitely appreciate it. Well, thanks for joining us on this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, and make sure to check us again next week when we are scheduled to speak with A10 on DDoS attack security for NFV and SDN powered networks. Thanks for watching.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN, and everything wireless, find your way over to rcrwireless.com.